Okay, I think we'll start. So thank you all for joining us, and welcome to the Millennium Cohort Study webinar featuring the recently released Age 17 sweep. Just a bit of housekeeping first. Please can you keep your cameras off and your mics muted at all times. If you have any questions, can you use the chat function, please? And any questions will be visible to all attendees. If you have any technical issues, please please email us on ioe.clsevents@ucl.ac.uk. And at the end, we would be really grateful for your feedback. So please follow the link in the chat at the end of the event for the short survey. We'd really appreciate that. So the other thing to say is that we are actually recording this as well. I'm Vanessa, a researcher at CLS, and I'm going to kick off with a very short introduction. Lucy, who's a survey manager at CLS, will give an overview of the content at age 17. Vilma, who's data manager for MCS, will give an overview of the data structure, features and resources available. At the end of each of these sessions, we can answer questions relating to that specific section. And then I'll finish with a few additional elements and what's next in the MCS, and then we can answer any additional questions you might have at that point. So just in terms of a brief introduction. So the MCS population consists of all children born between September 2000 and August 2001 in England and Wales, and from November 2000 to January 2002 in Scotland and Northern Ireland. In addition, the children had to be alive, living in the UK and eligible to receive child benefit at age 9 months. The first sweep included 18,552 families, which was around 18,800 cohort children. Moving swiftly on to the MCS Age 17 survey, the productive number of families was 10,625, and that relates to 10,756 cohort members. The overall response rate was around 73% for the core survey. And as you'll see, the response rate was better in England than other countries. In addition, not shown here, there was also a boost survey of interviews, which we'll talk about later. There are also different response rates for different elements of the survey. So there are just under 9,000 which are fully productive, responding to all or nearly all of the elements, and around 1,680 which are partially productive. And more information about the numbers can be found in the user guide and the technical report. Just to give an overview, there were many elements of the survey. The household interview, which was asked first, establishes eligibility, and as I said, that was completed first. And as you can see and would expect for the age 17 survey, the shift in survey elements has moved away from the parent completing the surveys to the cohort members themselves. And Lucy is now going to run through the content.
Okay, so here we are. So I'm going to talk you through the various parts of the age 17 survey and the various things we included and what the focus was. And I'm going to start with talking a little bit about the content of the survey over time and how it's been changing. So each sweep has different focus and different things that have been included, although there have been some things that have remained fairly consistent throughout. So here we see at the top, we can see that we've always asked parents a questionnaire describing that to talk about the cohort member. But this year it was a little bit different because we did that online and it ceased to be the main focus. That was no longer the main thing. For some years now, we've also had a self-completion questionnaire that the cohort member themselves have filled in. But we've added on to that as well by not just doing that in the house, but also having some of that online as a questionnaire done outside of the interview for the first time. And also for the first time, there was an interviewer administered questionnaire. So the interviewer talked directly to the cohort member themselves. We also have, consistent with a number of other sweeps, physical measurements where we've taken height, weight and body fat, which I'll talk about later, and a cognitive assessment. However, we didn't have some of the other elements that we saw at previous sweeps, such as activity monitor, time use reporting and saliva. So moving on. Age 17 is a very particular time for our cohort members. They are taking up very different paths from each other, and they're embarking on different occupational, educational paths, and that we wanted very much for that to be reflected in the content. It was important that we've got a benchmark for that time before they have very different, before they go on their different journeys. It's also a very key time for us from a point of view of engagement. For the first time, the cohort members were able to give their own consent to taking part, and we wanted to reflect that very much in the way that we approach them and in how we ran the survey. We were also acutely aware that many of our cohort members would be leaving the parental home after this sweep, and it was important for that they remain part of the study, because if they didn't take part in this crucial stage, we might lose track of them in future years, and that was one of the reasons why we did the CAWI boost, which I'm going to talk about later. And also in our approach, we wanted it to be very much more about the cohort members themselves. They're now of an age when they can talk for themselves much more. And although the parents were still involved, they were less central. So here's a brief overview of the content at age 17. The household questionnaire was still very much part of it. This was a questionnaire that's asked of any resident adult in the household. In the past, we've always made it ideally the parent, and I think that was still very much the case, but it could be anybody who lived there. In fact, it could even, for the first time, be a young person themselves, a cohort member. And it covered a household grid, which included everyone who lived in the house and how they were related to one another. Some questions about the household, and we included here as well some questions that had previously been in the parent questionnaire, usually about the household itself. We also had the parent questionnaire, which was online for the first time, and that was asked of both parents, essentially the same questionnaire for them for each of them. And there was also a paper SDQ questionnaire, which was given to one parent. It could have been either. There was no particular preference as to who filled it in, and it was the strengths and difficulties questionnaire for the describing the young person. Then the cohort member themselves, we had a face-to-face interview for the first time, which included data linkage consents and what we call a CAPI, or self-completion questionnaire, where the young person is given a laptop to fill in some questions themselves, and a self-completion, which is also called a CAWI, which is done on the web, and they filled that in after the interview. We also had a cognitive assessments on number activity, and we did the physical measurements, height, weight and body fat, which I've mentioned before. Each parent was asked to do an online questionnaire, and one parent did the paper SDQ questionnaire. And I just want to talk quickly about what the parent questionnaire involved. So these were questions about the family situation, whether the cohort member was likely to go to university, the relationship of the parents with their child, the cohort member, the parents' own health and mental health, and their employment and income, as well as housing, tenure, and contact information, which would be vital for future engagement. The cohort member elements were included cognitive assessments, physical measurements, and these 3 questionnaires, which I've talked about before, face-to-face, self-completion, and on the web. So let's talk a little bit about cognitive assessments over time on the questionnaire. We have been including these since age 3, different cognitive assessments being held each time. At age 17, we were doing number analogies activity. So the number analogies activity was from GL Assessments. It basically assesses young people's arithmetic knowledge and reasoning with numbers. And the interviewers were asked to try and conduct these in try and make the conditions for it to be the same for each young person. They were told to make sure it was in a well-ventilated, light room. They gave them some practice questions first, and they tried to maintain some consistency about how it was conducted. I should also add that they were asked not to do it if a young person had particular learning difficulties or in certain conditions. It consisted of 10 questions and was timed to be 6 minutes. If a young person finished before the 6 minutes was up, they were told to go back and check their work, but at the end of the 6 minutes, they were asked to stop. And so we also did physical measurements and samples, which we have collected since age 3. So we've done various different things with this over the different sweeps. At age 17, though, we just did height, weight, and body fat. We didn't do any of the activity monitoring or saliva or samples that have been done at age 14. So it's just the height, weight, and body fat, but these were collected in very precise conditions, and the interviewers were trained to collect these in a way that was consistent across every cohort member. And so what the cohort member questionnaires consist of? Well, I've mentioned before that there were 3 of them. The interviewer-administered questionnaire, which was 20 minutes, a self-completion questionnaire, which was done in the house, which was 15 minutes, and then another online questionnaire afterwards, which was also 15 minutes. So the cohort member face-to-face questionnaire, this was conducted by the interviewer, and this allowed for slightly more complicated questions to be asked. And we asked things about family and home life, income and employment, which included things like the paid work and apprenticeships that the young person was doing, and we could probe in depth about that. We also asked some very complex to administer questions around education and schooling, which meant that we could ask them for all the qualifications they've gained and all the qualifications they were studying for, and we could go through that in some detail. We also asked about general health and physical activity, and just in Wales, we asked about Welsh national identity. And importantly, we were collecting contact information for the cohort member themselves and their consent to data linkage. This was something that we wanted. Data linkage was something that the cohort members were able to give direct consent for without asking their parents, although we did encourage them to discuss the matter with the parents. We also made sure they were given leaflets and explained fully what they were consenting to, and they were given access to a short film explaining what was involved with data linkage. And we were asking about linkage for education records, health records, economic records, and police and criminal justice records from the various respective departments covering both England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. We also had a cohort member self-completion questionnaire. This was done in the house, so we wanted to make sure they answered all of these questions, and the interviewer was able to hand them a laptop to answer it in private. This meant that they could we hoped they would give honest answers to some very sensitive questions. It took about 15 minutes, and it was things like relationship with their family, a copy of the strengths and difficulties questionnaire, personality, physical, mental, and health and well-being, things like relationship, sex and pregnancy, risky behaviours, and gender identity and sexual identity. So quite sensitive things there. The CAWI questionnaire is an online questionnaire. It's another way of saying online questionnaire, which was done outside of the interview. The respondents were asked to do it after the interviewer had left. Could also cover sensitive questions about personality, activities, risky behaviour, diet and body image, risk and time preferences, identity, learning and the future, and life and well-being. It was a way really of us being able to ask a little bit more, break up the interview, be able to talk a little bit more to the respondent, and carry on the questionnaire. But not all of them did this, but we still had a high response rate. As always, there are quite a few psychological development and health inventories which have been part of MCS for some time, and I know there's a lot of interest in those. We've listed them out here, what has been covered. The Kessler 6, which was asked for the first time of young people, but has also asked of parents. The audit PC for the parents was, which is about alcohol consumption. There was also a young person brief self-control scale and a young person eating choices index, which is about the, I think it's 4 questions or 4 components about consumption of things like breakfast, fruit, milk, and bread. And also a young person social provision scale, a young person's strengths and difficulties questionnaire, the young person's Big 5 personality traits, or OCEAN, it's also called. I've mentioned the Kessler 6 and the Weblen's wellbeing scale. We've mentioned at several points there was a boost questionnaire. When we had exhausted all the fieldwork and we had been trying to get in contact with the young person, and either their family had taken part but they hadn't taken part, or we had failed to get in contact with, refused, we asked them again whether they might be prepared to do a short online questionnaire so that we could keep in contact with them and find out the most essential information. 17-year-olds are particularly difficult to get hold of, so this was a way of just boosting our response rate but also staying in touch. And it was only for the cohort members, not their parents, and it covered the most important topics from each of the sections, and it also collected contact information. We are very aware that designing a survey for teenagers, we had to be careful to make sure the engagement was correct, and we did quite a bit of work before the survey to make sure we got this right. So we had a workshop on engagement and processes, covering parental involvement, engagement with the young person, how they wanted to be engaged with, how they felt about the cognitive test and how we could present that to them, and how to present the data linkage. We also did cognitive testing of the questions themselves and usability testing of the online questionnaires, and did 2 pilots, pilot and a dress rehearsal. So there was quite a lot of work building up to it to make sure that it really worked with this age. I also wanted to show you some of the engagement materials that we used. We sent a leaflet, brief part of it here I'm showing you, in advance of the survey, so saying them telling them what we'd like them to do. It used the design that we had developed at age 14, but slightly refreshed for age 17, so it was a little bit more up to date and a little bit more in line with their age. We also sent a similar leaflet to the parents. We knew that the parents, although the young person could give consent, but the parents were key gatekeepers, and we wanted them to feel involved and that we were respecting all the time that they put into it in the past as well. We also very wanting to be careful about the impact that a survey can have on a young person. Sometimes it brings up topics that they start reflecting upon and want to think about and maybe want help on. And so we gave them an information booklet, so if they did want to talk about any of the things that have come up in the survey, who they should contact and where they could get help if that were needed. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, I believe if you put them in the chat, that would be enough for them. Otherwise, okay.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes for questions, specifically about the content. Does anyone have any questions about that at all? There aren't any in the chat at the moment. Okay, the first question from Ross will come back to. Ailing asked, did you notice any mode effects doing more online or the boost? Lucy, you're muted.
Sorry. So we haven't, as far as I'm aware, sort of noticed anything particular, or I haven't investigated that. But I would imagine a lot of the questions that were in the online boost were done as a self-completion anyway. Would have been done had they been done in the household. They would have been done as a self-completion. So the mode was very similar. But I'm not aware of any big differences. But it's a good question and worth looking into.
Okay, and IPEC asked, does the wellbeing questions include any financial wellbeing ones?
I think the wellbeing ones that I was referring to, well, I was thinking about it when I was talking it through, are around sort of mental health wellbeing. However, I'm not. I think there may be questions. But I would have to go back and check. I honestly don't know.
There are questions on income of the cohort member, if that you mean by financial well-being. And there are questions about the aspirations of the cohort member and whether they see feasible to go to the university and how much it might cost them. So I'm going to talk to you about the data of MCS7. The first point is the resources. We have the MCS7 user guide, which describes how the survey was filled and also information about the questionnaire. The second is the technical report in the middle, which is the details about the fieldwork. Also very useful the first two ones are very useful from a methodological point of view about how the survey was applied. And the last user guide is the derived variables, which details the information about how we derived the variables that you find in the derived variables datasets. Now, the information exists not only in the UKDS, you can find in the UKDS in the folder you download from the UKDS with the data. There is a folder called Docs or Excel, and this has most of these user guides, if not all. And these are also available from the website of CLS, if you go to documentation, as you see here, if you go to user guides, questionnaires, or technical reports, you can find everything there too. Now, for some of you, this may be familiar, but from some of you who may have not worked on MCS before, this might be new. MCS is a study where the unit is the family and MCSID is a family identifier, And then within each family, we have additional identifiers, which is the CNAM, the cohort member number, and the PNAM, which is the person number. This means that the data, most of the data, are in a long format, meaning that you need at least 2 of these identifiers to identify a specific role. Now, the CNAM shows the number of the cohort member within a family, an MCS family, and the person number is the person number for everyone else apart from cohort members, like parents, siblings, within a family. The important detail here is that the person number is random within each family. For example, the person number 1 in one family may be a parent, but in another family it may be a sibling, it may be a grandparent. And it also remains, both the CNAM, MCSID, CNAM, and PNAM remain the same across sweeps. So whatever, if the person number for 1 is the mother in the one sweep, it will be the mother in the next sweep. If it's for any sibling, it will be the same sibling for the next sweep. 2 identifiers have become obsolete in MCS7. The one is a league and the other one is RESP, which were used in MCS 1 to 6. However, the design of MCS7 that has focused on the cohort member made these less usable, and they are not included in the parent datasets of MCS7. I am going to talk about alternatives and how to handle the data because these identifiers are not used anymore. Or not anymore, they are used in previous sweeps for 1 to 6, not 7. So regarding the variable naming conventions, they are the same as in previous sweeps. The first letter of the variable name is the sweep. The second variable, the second character of the variable name is the respondent who answered the questionnaire. So it could be the parent, it could be the cohort member, it could be the derived, depending on the questionnaire section. And the middle section of the variable name is the question code that appears in the questionnaire. So when you find in the questionnaire a specific code, the 4-character code in bold that happens to be just above the questions, it's exactly the same with the question with a variable name. So you can this way you can match what exists in the questionnaire and what exists in the variable names. And the last 2 characters are used to distinguish multi-coded and looped variables. Go to the next slide. As Lucy mentioned, MCS7 had a design that included 2 samples. The first one and the main one, which has a bit more than 10,000 cases, is the core and the face-to-face interview, which included any of these elements. So it doesn't mean that you're going to have all of this data in all of the families. So in some families, only the parent, or you might have only the parent or the cognitive assessment, or basically in most of them you are going to have the cohort member data, and you might not have, for example, the physical measurements of the parent. But this is the core. It started with a household interview. Information was collected about the household, and then the interviewer progressed into the different sections of the questionnaire. So what you see there in the core is what the information exists in our data. And then, if there was an unproductive family, or specific families were issued for the boost, and if there was a partial productive outcome also from the core, they were contacted through online, and then we have the boost online follow-up web survey, where some cohort members provided information through CAPI, which included through the web. However, the questionnaire was done, as Lucy mentioned, the different sections of the CAPI and CAWI. Now, very few cases exist in both. So very few cases may have data in part of the core face-to-face interview and from the boost. And to help you with identifying the total numbers for your research, we have added in the MCS7 household grid dataset the GOUT variable, which shows the outcome for the different questionnaire sections and for the sample. Now we go to the details about how the household grid outcome variables look like. It's a new addition for MCS7. I have 2 examples here. The one is on the right, you see the GOUT CM CAPI, and the other one is the GOUT par CAWI, the parental CAWI. And you see that those that are productive do appear also in the parent and CM interview. So the household grid contains all of the cases that were productive for MCS7, and then in the subsequent data sets, you find the productive cases for that part of the interview. An important variable is the G-out sample. The G-out sample provides you with information on how the cohort member was interviewed and in which sample it belongs. For example, it could be face-to-face only, if it was in the core, only boost, and it could belong to both. You can see on the graph on the right that, for example, a family, a child that was productive in the boost will have a role in the CM interview. And the boost helps numbers and have a higher data, higher numbers in the data set, primarily for the CM interview. So if you focus on the CM interview, the boost will help you. And the total number of cases in the boost is 250, whereas in the both core and boost is less than 50 from them. And very few cases will have information in parent interview, cognitive assessment, or physical measurement, because they had started the interview of the core before this was stopped and they were moved to the boost sample. Now the next slide, we have about the data handling of parent and carer data that I told you about. So a leak variable it does exist in MCS7, but doesn't have the same significance. So as Lucy mentioned, the questionnaire was exactly the same for both parents in sweep 7. It's not like in sweep 1 to 6 where the main respondent, the main parent or carer answered most of the questions and a few of the questions were answered by the partner. This time both received the same questionnaire. And at the same time, it was an online questionnaire, and it might be that you may have productive data, actual data from the interview, only from the partner and not from the main. I say this because it might be that you have used a leak to merge data, or you might have used a leak to merge data, or you might have selected the main partner in the past because they used to provide most of the information. But in this case, and that's why I have the visualization on the right, the main respondent might be unproductive, and you might have information from the partner. An option on using this information would be to use the GP-num, the person number, and connect to the different previous data sets which do have the p-num, SHIPs 1 to 6. And another characteristic is creating a composite variable that summarizes the data on the family level for both parents. And there is a section on the data handling guide on that. I'm going to come back to about how to use the data handling guide and what it includes. Now, the Longitudinal Data Dictionary is a new resource that we have added. You can find it in the subfolders that you download from the UKDS. It contains the data from all sweeps of MCS, the survey responses primarily, and both EUL and user license and secure access data. It contains also the question code, the CAPI, that appears in the questionnaire. And from that, you can search if a variable appears in different sweeps. You can search for a topic that you find interesting in the variable label. And there is guidance on how to use it also in another tab. And this contains information even for datasets that are cross-sweeps, so it's quite useful to find data. Next is the MCS. I would like to talk to you about the MCS Longitudinal Family file. The MCS Longitudinal Family file contains the weights, and it is not done. You cannot download it with MCS7. You can download it with the UKDS DSN 8172. You download separately from a different folder. Now, the important detail about the Longitudinal Family file it's the inclusion of the variable data availability, which shows whether the data are available under end-user license or secure access. The reason for the inclusion of this variable is because some cases were considered sensitive and they were moved into secure access. And you can request this data. these were very few families. I think there were less than 15. You can find them in the Longitudinal family file. Now, the reason I mention this is because you're going to find the total numbers in the technical report or in the user guide about the total numbers productive in MCS7, which may not match exactly the numbers in the data sets. The reason is this variable, this is documented in this variable that moves some cases, shows which cases are existing in secure access. So the end user license is a large subset of full data sets. Regarding, and finally, how do we find data? How we find variables? The first resource that we added now is the MCS Longitudinal Data Dictionary. The next resource is the questionnaires. Very important to see how exactly the question was asked and questions before and after. And the platform, the Closer platform, which helps you find the question longitudinally in different studies as well. And the data handling guide is also a recent resource which provides syntax in R, Stata, and SPSS. It describes the different data structures of MCS, the different long formats of the data sets. It provides guidance, ideas on how to restructure the data if you would like, how to merge them with different sweeps, what each identifier does, and also how to go from long to wide or wide to long, depending on what you would like. But this is the resource where you can practice or use whatever you like from there. And feel free to ask me questions. And I need to stop sharing so I can see. Great, so I can see comments. I have a question that I saw earlier from, thank you for providing the session. Do you know when data on prior education qualification, further education qualifications and subject currently studied will be made available on the UKDS? Yes, I know. It will be in early 2021. That dataset contained quite disclosed information, and we had to recode some of it so that they can be shared under end user license. So most of these variables, the large number like GCSEs, BTECs, IGCSEs, all will be shared under end user license in early 2021. And some of it will be available under secure access, but only the small numbers when they are very low counts will be under secure access. And feel free to ask me questions. It's a good opportunity because I have additional visualizations with me. I came prepared. So I'm sorry, I'm going through the questions. The weights, Vanessa is going to talk about the weights after me, so we're going to come back to it. And at the end of the session, we're going to have questions for everyone if we have missed a question. A comprehensive user guide. So good question. So the first section of each user guide is the user guide 1 to 5, then the user guide for sweep 6, and the user guide for sweep 7. All the first section that describes how the survey was, the details of the methodology and the design of the study in the sampling stage and the first stage is the same, and all the information is provided there. So that is the comprehensive section. Now, if you are asking for a comprehensive user guide for all studies in one, no, there isn't. But the first section of all these user guides show this information about how MCS was designed in early sweeps. We're going to talk about linkage in a bit. From the top of my head, no, I do not remember how many cohort members. I wouldn't like to guess, but
it varied for different elements of that, because they could they could give their consent to different areas. So actually, Lucy might know.
So it would be more than 50%, but I cannot, but certainly not 100%.
I think it's there in the technical report.
It is in the technical report, yeah.
I just wanted to say it's, but it is different for different, and they are quite high. I know they're quite high.
Yeah.
I think it's at least 50% for each, isn't it? And
then, yeah, for sure.
Well, I think it's well above. I think it's sort of 70-80%. I think for some of them. So.
And there is a question on what was the reason to administer tests on number activities and not on vocabulary, for instance. That is a question for Lucy. Okay. However, just to mention that it is not necessarily, it's an activity with reasoning. It's not exactly, it does use numbers, but it is not a mathematics exercise. Lucy will answer more.
Basically, we hadn't done anything with numbers since age 7. That was probably the key reasoning behind it, and the reason why we chose that particular thing is we didn't want something that was exactly correlated with maths tests that they do at school. We wanted something a little bit different from that because we have data linkage. We can see how they're doing in maths tests at school. This is about more to do with their reasoning around that. So that's where that comes from, and that was the reasoning behind that. I hope that answers that question.
And the question on regarding there is information about language they use with parents and other children and in the household. Yes, there is. Yes, there are these questions about what language is spoken at home and with their friends.
Okay, so I think
we can move.
Yeah. So we can ask for some more questions at the end, and I'll just upload. Okay. So I just wanted to briefly talk about weighting. So when you're conducting your analysis, you should use the weights which take account of the stratification and clustering sample design of the MCS. And you should also take account of attrition and non-response. The stratification variable is PT type 2, and there are 9 different strata. So the population was stratified by 4 countries, England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And then there were further stratification within country. So in England only there was an ethnic minority stratum, and that was children living in wards, which in the 1991 census had an ethnic indicator of at least 30%. And in all the countries, 2 further stratum, disadvantaged and advantaged. Disadvantaged was children living in wards other than the ethnic for England, which fell into the poorest wards, and advantage was not in the ethnic or the advantaged. There's also a clustering variable, which is SPTN00, and this is the primary sampling unit. The primary sampling unit was electoral wards, and in total there are 398 wards, 200 in England, 73 in Wales and 62 in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So all the weights, and in terms of specifically related to weights, there's a section in the user guide in chapter 12. So for all the weights are held in the MCS Longitudinal Family file, and just here's an example of using weights in Stata. The sampling weights adjust the sample composition to take account of oversampling in the first wave. And the attrition weights adjust the sampling composition to take account for the loss of particular type of respondents. And basically, the choice of the overall weight will depend on the analysis you are doing. So the weight should correspond to the most recent wave of data you are using. So for example, if you were using MCS Sweep 7, then you would use the weights beginning with G. And also will also depend on whether you're using, whether you're doing analysis on the whole of the country or single country analysis. If you're using a program which basically can't account for the weights, or you haven't got SVY in terms of Stata, then you should use the weight options, the G weight options, and use the stratum as another control in your regressions. So I just wanted to highlight other data in the MCS, which is or will soon be available. So there'll be 3 COVID-19 online surveys. As you may know, the first was completed in May and is currently available in the UK data service. The second was conducted in September, October, and is about to be available, if not available, imminently. And there will be a third wave with field work early next year. Secondly, we have genetic data available, and this is not only for the cohort members, but also the biological parents. And there'll be a webinar early next year to talk about that. And currently, in terms of linked administrative data, we've got the GCSE data available for England. We've got Welsh education and health data and NHS Scotland data. In progress at the moment is the Key Stage 5 A-level data, police national computer data, and the hospital episode statistics. And these are forthcoming. So what's next in the study? So MCS Suite 8, there's planning started already for the age 22, and this will be subject to funding. And there'll be a scientific consultation, and that's expected early in 2021 and will last for 8 weeks. So watch out for any news on this. Just to reiterate, that data is available from the UK Data Service, and you'll need to register if you haven't already done so. And as Vilma said, along with the data, all the downloads contain resources and documentation. Has already been highlighted, there's a wealth of information on the CLS website, and this includes all information on previous sweeps. So that's it. Thank you. So we can answer any of your questions.